be enthusiastic and welcome the change, because there's only really two ways. Either you get on board and you support the change and you become an active participant, or if you don't help make the change happen, then the change will happen to you. And then the outcome will be without your input. If you see an opportunity, however small, in wherever you're working, just grab it, just put your hand up, just say, let me take a swing at that. And you'll be surprised how often your mentor, your manager, whatever, is more than happy to give you a try at something. And it'll pay off. Respect for the people working there, respect for how they have to do their daily jobs, is an absolute core component of making a transformation successful.
Welcome to Our Change Shift Happens. Today we've got Maximilian K. Mayr with us. Max is a transformation specialist within the M&A space. Thank you so much for being here with us today. I know that through our conversations, you have, impacted transformations across the, PE portfolios, and you delivered over $1 billion of value to your clients. Really appreciate your time. Shall we dive in?
Thanks for having me.
Okay. So my first question to you is, we talk about transformations as either digital transformation, operational, people, etc. Could you give us a bit of a view around what kind of M&A transformations look like? What types of transformations are there, and how do you get involved?
Yeah, sure. So I think when you talk about an M&A transformation, so a transformation as a direct consequence of some sort of transaction happening, it can be just a purchase, it can be an add-on, or it can be a carve-out. You're creating a natural environment of chaos. Like it's an inevitable consequence that you create a space where all these people, and it can be for a company of 20 people, it can be for a company of 20,000 people. You're creating a situation where everyone all of a sudden has 20% of their work mind occupied with the question, how are things going to work in the future? What do I do right now? Like, what's happening? How is it going to impact me, etc. So when a company gets acquired, we create uncertainty for people and for the workers. And that uncertainty is always a negative for them. So that transformation at the end of the day has two goals. And one of the goals is something that we see very, very consciously together with the shareholder. And the other one's a little bit hidden, but it's no less important. And you could argue it's even more important. The obvious one is we have the goal to successfully complete the transaction and get the business to a point where it's able to operate at a steady, sustainable pace. It's able to be disconnected from any prior shareholdership or group connection that it had. We are able to implement necessary transformation changes in business and operations. And that's all nice and great. Like you've talked about this to death on this podcast, so I don't need to elaborate that any further. That's what we understand via traditional transformation. But the other side of it is the management of this uncertainty that I just spoke about, which is, let's start with something simple. There's a reason a business gets acquired. It's because it's, for whatever reason, whether the business has performed well or not so well, it is attractive to whoever's buying it, and they want to make something of it. And they want to make something of it for a few reasons. It can be the IP, it can be the product, it can be the market position that it has by inertia, but in some way, inevitably, it's because of the people who work there and who drive those processes. And the product and the technology doesn't get anxious at night when it gets acquired, and neither does a building or neither does a brand, but people do. And so the main parts, I would say more than 50%, if I'm being honest, is just managing things, keeping stability and troubleshooting day to day, and trying to keep things running while we have that second half of the equation, achieving the goals to successfully complete the transaction and the transformation connected to the transaction, and landing that. But you will never achieve that, even though that's what we spend all our time talking about, if you are not able to keep the chaos in check, which is the main job, I would say, of a chief transformation officer in that way.
Yeah. And so we have talked about kind of the types of transformations that you've worked on before. By this, I mean, carve out, turnaround, growth, etc. Do you have a favorite? And why?
Yeah, do I have a favorite and why? My favorite is always when there's a natural growth angle. And I find myself most comfortable if it's coupled with some sort of special situations angle. That can be a carve out, that can be a repositioning of a business. For example, historically, I've worked with industrial businesses that have worked for mass market, high volume, low margin customers in the past. And then they decided, actually, that's not sustainable anymore for whatever reason. We want to pivot towards bespoke, high margin, low volume business. And that's a huge change, because all of a sudden, instead of working, if you would, as on a conveyor belt, you have to work with highly specialized designs. You have to work with customer requirements. All of a sudden, account management and sales becomes relevant. And so that kind of special situation where you change kind of how the business works, that can be, for example, a turnaround, but that can also happen if a new strategic buyer acquires a company and they're like, we want to leverage the strengths of this business for something else than what they've historically done. That's somewhere where I have a lot of fun, because I enjoy helping people think in new ways, thinking, okay, like this is how you've done your job for 10 years, but now we need to do it a slightly different way. Let's sketch out how that works, etc., and so on. And then why with a growth angle? With a growth angle, I'd say because a growth angle gives everybody an optimistic mindset. If you have a business that's been increasing in revenue, that the solid margins, that has its cash coming in every month, then you're in a very different situation than that monthly conversation you have to have with your shareholder about, okay, we have a gap, we need to fund the gap, what do we do? It eats up resources, but more than that, it eats up morale. And so that's not to say that you can't manage these projects, and there's a lot to be said. We come back to the earlier point on managing chaos and managing uncertainty and disruption. But it's just more fun to work in a growth environment. And so especially then when you bring in full circle, work in an environment where there is distress, but you can make people see the light at the end of the tunnel, where the growth and the improvement becomes tangible to them. And that's the most important thing, because you might work in a business that's not been going well for a couple of years, and they will have heard the story of like, we're going to grow again and we're going to improve again. They will have heard it so many times that it becomes the faceless platitude to them. So how do you take them along the journey, those small steps, those small incremental improvements, that they start believing, oh, things are actually changing and we might actually have a chance to get there again. So those are the favorites, I think, where you can, either you can hop on the train of optimism and accelerate it even further, or you bring them back from a direction of despair and pessimism towards kind of optimistic thinking again.
I'm interested to maybe set some context here. So if I think about the listenership, there is a received wisdom around private equity, and there is a nervousness around your type of role, particularly in that context. So I'd be really interested. Can you describe your role?
Yeah.
And prior to a sitting down, there was a phrase that we used while we had a coffee.
Yeah.
The CEO.
Yeah.
But it wasn't maybe perhaps as everyone may listen.
Yeah.
So could you put some context on your role and where you see it playing in the space of pre, post, and during the transformation?
Yeah. So I spent about 10 years of my career in permanent roles in some shape or form or another as an operating partner within shareholder firms. That means I worked for private equity owners, institutional funds, family backgrounds.
What's an operating partner?
An operating partner, thank you. So an operating partner is in a PE fund is usually someone who comes from the industry, from an operating role. That can be a chief operating officer, chief executive officer, and they have a lot of experience with hands-on working with portfolio businesses.
Okay.
They distinguish themselves from an investment partner or just partner in most funds.
Yeah.
In that their primary role is not to source and execute new investments, but to go into the businesses and work on hands-on strategy with the portfolio company management. So that can be, if you run a manufacturing business, they will help you think about what clients should you tackle? Is the current way of working correct? Is there improvements we can make in supply chain and purchasing, even in things like finance, HR, and IT, things like that. And so some operating partners are very focused. So you have finance operating partners that will have been prior CFOs, sometimes at very large businesses, and they'll come in and support a fund in enhancing the finance function across their businesses. Same for a chief procurement officer or a chief technology officer, of course. A general operating partner instead is usually someone who comes from a CEO style background, which means they've had responsibility over a broad range of topics. And so I myself have done the work of a general operating partner, not always at the partner level, but for a good decade before I went freelance about 3 years ago. And so an operating partner is basically, in government, you call them a minister without portfolio. Like a topic comes in, it goes on their desk, it has to be resolved.
Yeah.
And that's not dissimilar to what a CEO does every day, right? Alongside the general day-to-day business. But if a topic comes in and no one in the business is specialized to be focused on that, then the CEO will have to take care of it in some way. So I like to say the chief transformation officer in the style that I work at is a pendant to the CEO, to the chief executive officer. And it's a similar CEO in that I call it the chief everything officer.
Yes.
Yeah? Because you have the chief executive usually when I pair with the chief exec and I try to work very closely with every single one that I work with on projects, the chief exec, I will say, focus on the day-to-day business, focus on your people, and I will focus on all the one-off, non-standard, chaotic things floating around left and right. And in that partnership, we will get things done. But the key thing about that chief transformation officer is you don't come in and you say, I'm very good at finance and I will support the CFO. And so you're on your own when it comes to procurement, operations, legal, strategy, whatever. You have to be able to basically have a bucket and you have a leaking roof and you have to catch everything that's falling through it because no one else is gonna. Like that's clearly the mandate here. And so at the end of the day, the job is about taking everything on and not necessarily knowing how to solve it in the first minute, but figuring it out and finding one or multiple solutions and then picking the one that gets things done as quickly as possible.
And do you seek counsel on prioritization, or is that something that you think is just an experience gut feel?
I think 100%. So one of the most critical things in that job is in the first week or two on a new project, your most important asset is your mouth and your most important skill is to keep it shut. And just listen to people, just absorb information and not even judge in the moment. Like you want to absorb and process, but you want to talk to everybody and understand, okay, talk to the chief operating officer, understand, tell me what's been happening the last 3 months, 6 months, 12 months. You'll gauge whatever the correct period is. Talk me through how this daily process works. Talk me through your downline reports and how they work and where there's trouble, etc. And essentially just take a couple days to understand everything, and people will tell you what the highest priority is. So if you talk to a head of HR, for example, then their biggest concern might be in the moment, we have a quality management concern and there is an audit coming up in 6 months. And if we don't pass that audit, then we will get certain sanctions and we might not get a certain ISO qualification. That's hugely important to the business. If 30 minutes down the line, you talk to the CFO and the CFO says, we have a week's worth of cash left in the bank and no money coming in unless someone picks up the phone right now, then I have a natural prioritization between those two things. And that's an easy one because that's standard across any business that I've just described. What I've just described could apply to any business in the world. But now take a more nuanced example. Take, for example, a business that is a subsidiary within a broader group. And you have on one side, you have a salesperson in the subsidiary who has a goal of closing a sale. And he can close the sale tomorrow if he gives the client a 5% discount. And what's going to happen is if he closes that sale, that subsidiary will achieve its targets, people will get bonuses, and everyone will be happy. At the parent group, they have a different situation. They look at global sales, and their KPI for the year is to not give discounts for whatever reason. So they'll say, we've actually been giving too many discounts, our margin has been suffering, etc., and so on and so forth. So we will not sign off any discount. And so all of a sudden you have a natural environment, a natural opportunity for frustration on both sides. Because if you just leave things as they are, the sales guy will try to close his deal. He will go to sign off for the parent. He will get denied and everybody's mad because nothing got done. And so these are the things where you jump in and you say, okay, this is very short term. This is high priority because if it's the end of the month next week, then I've got to jump in and I've got to have a conversation, get people on the phone, find either a one-off solution. We split the difference with the discount, do something else. So we give the poor sales guy in the subsidiary an extension so that his sale can close in 14 days and he still gets his bonus. Things like that. But those are where it comes to also experience. Just no one will give you a playbook as to how to handle that situation, right? Because that's a one-off situation that'll happen once in your career. So that's a situation where no one's going to tell you how to tackle that situation. It's just something where you have to have the confidence, even if it's manufactured confidence, to go in and suggest a solution, get people around a table, make a suggestion. I suggest this is what we do, split the difference, like everybody's slightly unhappy, and that's what we call compromise. And those are things you might prioritize over other things that have a 1 week or 4 week or 6 month lead time until they become critical or urgent. But at the same time, you may have things that come to pass in 6 months, but if you don't action now, and it might have to do with, let's say you're working with a business that's going through a very difficult period of change. And in fact, they are changing how they are sourcing their product, how they are delivering their product, installing the product on site with the clients, and so on and so forth. One of the challenges you might have is if you change your way of working and 6 months down the line, you have an auditor coming in, that auditor might then say, well, hang on a second, like last year we certified this process. and this year you did whatever the hell this is.
Yeah.
And we have no way of kind of having like auditing any sort of continuity from one to the other. So you'll sit there in 6 months and there will be, okay, great. Now you have to dredge up half a year of chaos because you haven't tracked things properly, because you haven't taken the right notes, because you haven't followed up on things. And so you have to judge, okay, like I can leave this thing lying to the wayside for now, but how much bigger of a problem will it snowball into 6 months down the line? So it might be worth, even in a very chaotic time, to take the time to implement a process for that, even if other things are on fire, because you know that 6 months down the line. And by the way, that might be after I've gone, so it might not even be my concern anymore.
Sure.
But I have to make the call that for this team, it will be a disaster if we don't address this problem now. But then try to have a conversation with an extended management team that's already under stress and go, hey, by the way, I know everyone's overworked. I know we're all stressed out, but here's a thing that'll be relevant in 6 months. And I need everybody to put in another 2 hours today to get their departments to follow these processes. That's the real challenge, right? Because something that happens next week, like the sale, people will see the urgency right in front of their faces, but they may not understand how critical something that's audit relevant in 6 months' time might be. This is what I mean, by the way. Like, I'm going to go on and on. Right?
No, you're doing really well.
Bit of a endless snake of content there, but
my mind goes to two different questions actually, and they're going to cover two different topics. So one is around business transformation. The other one's about kind of personal development and career journey. So I'll do the business transformation first. So we held an event last week talking about transformation, balancing people, process and tech. And as part of that, we sort of did a bit of digging around and found a figure that, consensus is that something like 70% business transformations fail. And by fail, we mean do not meet their anticipated goals or their initial goals. What do you think about that figure? Question number one. Question number two, what do you think is kind of the biggest cause of failure of transformations that you've seen throughout your career?
Yeah, I think to address the first point about what do I think about the statistic of 70% failing. I mean, I agree. If you define it as you've just done, which is they don't meet the anticipated goals, just because you haven't met anticipated goals, for me, doesn't mean a transformation has necessarily failed. Because coming back to what I said earlier, during a transaction, a shareholder, and again, where I said the investment team of a fund may come in and say, we're going to buy this business. Afterwards, the operations team is going to do this with it. We're going to send Max in, we're going to send Belma in, and they're just going to sort it out. And these are the things we will have down the line. Now, you need to understand that 95% of transactions in the world that are planned this way, and that will ultimately almost always be those will be the milestones that you will get tasked to achieve as a transformation professional. They are done on a spreadsheet purely. Yeah, they're done on paper. You have analysts sitting in an office somewhere in London or in New York, and they'll do analysis and they'll pay some guy from GLG to talk to them on the phone. And that is great. Like, these people are super valuable, but they will rely on consulting firms. They will rely on annual accounts, and they will say, okay, we can cut this here and we can do that, and so on and so forth. So I've had businesses where, sorry, I'll connect to that before I start going on a tangent again. So they will be done purely on paper. And the paper story will never match up to what you find on site when you go locally to the business, when you interact with the people. So by that definition, I'd say 100% of transformations fail.
Okay,
and that's a good thing, because if we ran businesses by spreadsheets, and there are investors who do that, right? Like if you go to the larger pension funds that maintain their own direct private equity teams, once you start dealing with assets, billions and hundreds of billions sometimes, they don't have the time to deal with their direct portfolio firms hands-on. So what they'll do is they will invest minority stakes, 5 to 10% here or there, broadly diversified. You'll have people spending a week on a deal. And then some analyst or some associate will get tasked to model in the operational improvements and this and that. And they'll say, we'll give this to
we think this is achievable.
We'll give this to the lead investor and they have to get it done. And, tell them to also reform the HR department or something else. By that definition, it'll never work because it's disconnected from what the reality is. So by that definition, I would say you'll fail 100% of all new transformations, because you can never connect to what Excel puts out. Yeah, Excel is patient. It'll say whatever you want
and
to
hopeful.
say. And exactly, overly optimistic. And then I think if you go a step further, if you say, okay, like I've looked at the business pre-transactions, I've gone on site, like I've spoken to the people there, and I've understood the processes, I've spent a day or two on the shop floor. you might reduce that percentage, but you won't reduce it from 100% to 0. You'll reduce it to maybe your 70%, maybe if you're lucky to 50, 40, 30%. But you will still fail to some degree, and you will never achieve 100% of everything that's set out. So the question about those 70% is like, how do you gauge success?
Yeah.
Do you gauge success like you have 15 things on your checklist and I've ticked 15, but if I've ticked 14 out of 15 and number 15 was I wanted to change the color of the logo from red to green, it's like, oh no, we failed.
Yeah.
Like, at the end of the day,
maybe we changed our mind and wanted the logo to be blue instead.
Or we've lost the right to the brand and we didn't realize until post-closing, right? Like I've seen all those things. But so first you have to define what's success. So by a simple definition of we haven't set out what we wanted to do at the time of the deal signing, yes, it's very likely you're going to fail. But then you have to ask yourself, hands-on practically, if you redefine success into we've acquired a business, we have, after we've gotten the lay of the land, I would say the first 2 months in, normally any transformation plan worth its salt is not signed off until 2 or 3 months into the transformation. And you can call it a version 2 or whatever you want. And it should in some semblance still reflect kind of the plan you had initially in mind. But you have to give yourself at least 1 to 2 months to actually understand how the business works. And then I would say that plan should have a fairly high rate of completion by the time you're done with it. That can be in 6 months or that can be in 3 years, depending on how you slice it. But if we go in and we say, okay, we've looked at the plan again, we've got a version 2 of this plan signed off. And now we are happy to execute that. Then we have to say, okay, what does success look like? So we may then still have 10 things we want to achieve. But then we should practically say we have 3 of those things that are essential to make this business have been a viable investment. Let's call it that. And those 3 things may be a big outsourcing program. They may be a pivot in your customer base. They may be an automatization of your production process, things like that, the big tickets. And then down the line of the rest of the 10, you may have another 3 or 4 that bring a lot of value, right? And that might be, for example, maybe we will change our procurement strategy and we will bring our cost down by 10%, and all of that is going to hit the bottom line. That's great. That's not going to help us if we can't pivot to the new customers. That's not going to help us if we can't automate maybe in this business, but they'll be nice to have.
Yeah.
And then we have 3 that are the cherry on top, so to say. So they can be, we have a very costly HR IT system. We want to replace that and we want to automate that and we want to outsource it potentially. But we will tackle those when the previous tiers of milestones have been achieved.
Yeah.
And now, how do you define success? So I would define success by saying the top 3 things that we've defined that are absolutely essential, they all have to be achieved. Yeah. No ifs, and or buts. And if you have to prioritize, coming back to your question about prioritization, if you have to prioritize day to day between the 10, then those 3 will always win out. We'll probably have to further prioritize between the 3, thinking what's going to make us stumble in the short term, what's going to disrupt day to day. And there will be some things that are more essential than others. What has a longer lead time to impact? What can we tackle on shorter notice? But overall, the 3 have to happen. That has to be your long-term goal. If you're on track for the 3 to happen, then you should probably say, if I've got 4 of the high-value add-ons, let's call them, of that middle segment, then your goal should be, I want to achieve, let's say, 2 of the 4, or 3 of the 4, or 1 of the 4. Doesn't matter. Yeah. And it'll really depend, because a high value add-on can be, I'll add $1 million in EBITDA to the bottom line, but it'll color in the success of the entire project differently if you're starting from 1 million EBITDA to begin with, or from 100 million. Yeah. It's always nice to have an extra $1 million in the bank. But there'll be different shades of it. And then down the line, the cherries on top, I would say, even if none of them have been achieved, if we've ticked the other boxes, then the project is still successful. And we have to always be conscious. We go in with a wish list, but a transformation is not Christmas, right? Like we don't get to say, this is what we want to have. And if Santa doesn't bring all the 17 things that I've asked for, then it's a failure. Yeah. Instead, we have to say, have we managed to leave a successful, viable business? Have we achieved what the investor has set out to receive in this business, in this operating business down the line? And if we do that, then it's a success. But sometimes that's a difficult conversation also with the shareholder, because they'll say, these are all the things we want to achieve. And we have set our KPIs that this entire EBITDA is baked in and that you'll achieve that in the next year. And then usually one of the first conversations I have to go in and say, okay, look, we've made a model and here we are. And realistically, you wanted 10.
Yeah.
In the first year, I can give you 3.
Yeah.
And by the end, I can give you 7. But we're not going to get to 10 because 10 is a fairy tale.
Yeah.
And one of the jobs of the role connected to that is also to be a mirror to the shareholder and say, look, this is where you are. This is what you can do. And this is the potential. But it might not be what you wanted initially. But we can still make something of it. And we can still make a positive impact on the entire package.
Yeah.
Can we talk about people?
Yeah.
So when you're looking within the business and you're in those first 2 months, and so you're thinking around phase 2, V2, whatever you want to call it, the transformation, how are you, or how quickly and by what metrics are you looking at the people within those businesses and making decisions? Because I think that's a huge concern of people within the businesses that are required.
Yeah. Especially
in the context of a PE, acquisition, transformation. We've talked about this before.
Yeah. Because I think lifting the lid on that role is what's really interesting around how you, I guess that falls to communication, to talent development, to talent recruitment, to repurposing. I think a huge part here is communication, because I think, like you said, when there's no noise, people will not fill it with positivity. They will fill it with negativity. In your role with a talent lens on, in those first 2 months, you have a community of shareholders who are incredibly excited. You have a community of senior leaders, SLT members, execco, who are hugely motivated. And then you have a large workforce, by whatever number you choose to split that, who are incredibly nervous, who've possibly, and in my role, more often than not, had either a negative or heard negative rhetoric around PE transformation, specifically around talent management, and the change of role profiles.
Yeah.
In your role, in that first 2 month window, that's probably where we're going to nail what we're going to do from a commitment perspective. How do you address that? The broader talents?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the elephant in the room is, like, when I come in, or any transformation professional comes in, especially if placed by a private equity, people look at them and you might as well be wearing the executioner's hood. That's the concern. You come in and people go, if I speak to this person in the wrong way, or I say something they don't like, or I send an email that they're not impressed by, the only impression they'll have on me is I'll go on the blacklist and I'm out. And to be fair, like, that stereotype, it doesn't come from nowhere, because it is something that in certain consulting environments is practiced, right? Like, we go in and we say, some people go in and say, we've got a headcount of 10,000 people. We've got a department that they have 300 people here, and our projections say the industry benchmark says we can do it with 60 people less, and 60 people times so much salary equals so many millions saved. And that's great, right? Until all of a sudden, 3 months later, you're getting rid of these people, you've paid severances, and some part of the business you've never heard of shuts down completely. And then you've got a bigger magnitude of problem to deal with. So I want to set the scene with that by kind of clearly stating, like, how I feel about coming in and basically just taking out the machete and starting literal head cuts left and right. Because I think a business is a little bit like a patient on an operating table, especially during a transformation, during a time of crisis. Like, during a period of change, positive or negative, you don't want to say wrong, but something is unstable with the patient.
Yes.
And you have to bring him back to stability in the best way possible. During that period of stability, if you had a doctor that went, I've got the patient on my table, and you know what, like, he's really excited to get this thing done as quickly as possible, so let me not look at the charts and I'll just start swinging the scalpel. You would probably not go to that doctor if that's the strategy that he sold you on. Yeah. Instead, what you want to see is he would say, okay, let me review the information, let me talk to you, let me understand your background, and moving away from the tenuous simile here. So we want to understand how the business works and how everybody contributes to it before we make any such decision. Now, if you do this with a business of, I would say, 50 to 100 people, then it's reasonably feasible that you can speak to the top 50% of that business at least once, understand what they're doing, understand deeper how their daily job affects the business, from their department leads, from the SLT, as you said. And then you can start thinking about what does everybody contribute to a whole? And maybe also take a step back and ask yourself, am I informed enough to understand whether this person is contributing in a way that is above the line for kind of what I see as acceptable? Yeah. Okay. And I think it's very easy to look at people in certain departments. So especially for me, this is being a non-tech person. Mm-hmm. This is especially the case with people working in tech departments at businesses. Talk about first and second level tech support, for example. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I might have the view that if you have 10 or 15 people sitting around a first, second level support, but their KPIs are okay, half of them are not utilized at any given point. There's KPIs. If I average it out throughout the year, then I can get rid of half this department and we'll still be fine. Mm-hmm. And what I won't realize is that once a month, there is a reset with a certain system that happens. Yeah. And then those 15 people will be at full capacity. They'll be working weekends and so on and so forth. And then I'll say, oh, but that's easy because I can just outsource this. Okay, yeah, that's great. You can outsource. But again, the second thing I didn't realize is they're running on a 25-year-old COBOL system that's been programmed somewhere in somewhere in the mountainside, and you have two people there who are in their 50s, and they programmed that by hand, and there's no documentation, there's nothing else. You've just let those people go. And so now your entire supply chain stands still because the way you were going to get your delivery slips for the customers was based on the system. And
your entire infrastructure is unsupported, And
so this is where I come back. Like somewhere on a spreadsheet, some investment analyst wrote that there's 30 people in this IT department and we can cut it to 15. So please achieve those savings. So again, if the doctor just starts swinging the scalpel, very bad idea. So what do I do, right? Like when I come in, and this is where I said earlier, kind of your biggest asset is keeping your mouth shut the first month or so, is just listening and understanding. And then what I can tell you is if we're going through a period of instability, the first thing I want is for as much of the business as I can manage to stay in place and just to keep doing what they're doing. We'll achieve savings in a variety of ways. Like if the shareholder is focused on cost base, for example, right? Then we can look at everything, and sometimes headcount is an inevitable component of that. But we need to look at ways to really understand, like, what are people contributing? Do they have the right tools to contribute in the right way? And can we find some sort of way, maybe even to look at the people who are there now and maybe utilize them in ways that we haven't looked at before, right? So you may have people doing very simple manual tasks, but they've been around the business for many, many years. And so actually what we can do is we can transfer them to another department. They would be highly suitable to do data entry, for example, to support a sales team that may be spending half their day just doing admin, right? Yeah. All of a sudden you got the sales specialist, more time to do sales. Yeah. Some data entry guy is able to do something else while his manual labor job is falling away somewhere else. So there are ways to achieve synergies, but this is obviously at the micro level. If you come into a business where you have tens of thousands of people, there's no way to get to know everybody, right? Yeah. And that's when you have to have a good feeling for department heads, for team leads, and really understand, okay, how do you do these jobs? But at the end of the day, I think for anybody who's affected by a PE takeover, right? Like you have a transformation person sitting in your office. What I can tell you is a good transformation person will want to keep stability while they get their bearing and while they understand what the transformation can look like to make the business the best it can be. From personal experience, the only thing I can tell you is I've never interacted with a person that showed even a tiny bit of enthusiasm and optimism towards change and for making things better and for having them and their colleagues and the departments perform the best it can, where I've said, this is not someone I want to have along for the ride. Yeah. Whether we have headcount down the line to bring them along, that's a separate topic. And sometimes we have to make hard decisions, especially for businesses in distress. But if we're growing and someone's coming in and a new PE owner, a VC investor, and they want to change things, the best thing you can do is you can go and if a question comes up and says, we're looking at automating this, or we're looking at changing this, or we're looking to get a different way of working with these customers, etc. The best thing you can do is like, okay, here's my view on it. Here's how I've been doing it. Let me know what you need. If I have a bit of flexibility, a bit of flexibility from someone saying, okay, I don't understand this topic. If I ask them, how do you think this works? Can you take care of this? Can you give me some ideas like how we can make this better. And if I just see the attempt to engage with the process, then I know that that's the kind of motivation I want to bring along for the ride. So if as an employee, you want to immunize yourself from being on that list, I think the best thing you can do is be enthusiastic and welcome the change, because there's only really two ways. Yeah. Either you get on board and you support the change and you become an active participant, or if you don't help make the change happen, then the change will happen to you. And then the outcome will be without your input.
Yeah. And actually, I think in your example of the kind of patient scenario, we're talking about, the patient being the transformation. I think kind of the lifeblood of the transformation is people.
Yes.
And we've talked about this before. I guess from my perspective, within a PE transformation, how important are people to you right off the bat when you come in to lead a transformation, to turn it around? How quickly do you deal with talent, and where is it placed on your priority agenda?
Yeah. So how high are people on the priority list, I think, it's a question you can look at in two ways, right? You could say one half of it is the talent portion of it, the human capital contributing to what the business is able to deliver. And the other half of it is the business's social responsibility, right? Like do we preserve jobs? Do we ensure that people have continuous employment? Do we worry about people being motivated, being happy in their jobs, for lack of a more complex term? In a way, they are not disconnected. Yeah, they interlink. If someone's not content, if they're not happy in their job, if you come in and you're transforming with the sledgehammer, just going whirlwind through the business, then it's unlikely you will leave a much improved morale with the workforce, which will later on impact retention. It will impact continuity of know-how. It
motivation,
will impact motivation, will impact everything. Yeah. And then you can say, okay, if I'm by what we just described, if I'm categorically downgrading the human capital through the transformation, then I've just made the business worse.
Yeah.
And so respect for the people working there and respect for how they have to do their daily jobs is an absolute core component of making a transformation successful. Now, to your question, which can be boiled down to, does PE care about people? I would say yes, but maybe not in the romanced way that we would like it to be, where they go, PE is the steward of corporate responsibility. And I think this is one of the issues we have when we talk about sustainability, ESG, and even things like DEI. So we have a lot of headlines from big corporates, from PE-owned businesses that want to make big pushes on sustainability, on environmental things, on diversity across the workforce, etc. And a lot of people have trouble buying into it as a credible selling point, right? Because we always think like, okay, but at the end of the day, you're just worried about the bottom line. Like you're just worried about like how much profit you can make out of this business. But the truth is, like, if you work in these businesses, you know that all of these things that we just mentioned have a positive effect on the bottom line.
Yes.
So if you work in an international business that is spread across every continent and most countries in the world, then having a leadership team that is only one gender, that is only one skin color, that is only one nationality will perform worse, and there's numbers on that, than a diversified team that can bring every single different viewpoint on it. Imagine if you ran a skincare company and you had no women on the leadership team, right? Which are your largest customer base. Imagine if you run that same company and your entire management team is from Western Europe or America, when 70% of the market is in Asia. And so these are the things where we have to go, okay, yes, PE cares about them, because good investors in the sector know that neglecting these components costs money. And so in a bizarre way, we're becoming an industry where the investors are becoming more conscious of these things, focusing more on these things. But in a way, I almost feel like we have to be honest enough that it's not just because PE investors want to be altruistic and they want to do good and they want to be charities. It's because they know that this is the way the wind's blowing in modern business. And it goes beyond simply signaling and appealing to people. It goes to really bringing every single viewpoint to the table and understanding that that's simply an essential component these days if you want to understand your customer base and if you want to understand your employee base and everything surrounding the business.
I think as leaders of transformation, what we're seeing as we're, continuing to do these podcasts and events around transformation, one of the things that's really coming across is that the most successful transformation leaders really understand exactly the things that you've just said. So, diversity of thought only really brings you a richness of strategy. That people are the backbone of any transformation. And if you want it to get anything done, you kind of have to have those people on board. And then I think thirdly, if somebody isn't on board, and you mentioned it in your answer, it's okay. You can either be the driver of change or you can have the change happen to you, not like it, and decide mutually that it's not the right place for you to be. And, it's not the right place for you to go. And one of the things that we've spotted is that most of the leaders that we've had on this podcast just really like people. And it sounds like you do as well. You have business at the forefront of your mind. The ability to balance this kind of people and business, is that something that you've learned over the years, or is it something that kind of just has always come naturally to you?
I think when it comes to balancing the human components, like with individual people, with individual situations, with the person sitting across from you on the table, not just being, again, a number on a spreadsheet, but being a real living, breathing human being. That's something where everybody that works in any job, you have to draw on personal background, right? It's not something you learn at university. It's not something you learn in a boardroom somewhere. But you have to, I think, draw on your own personal empathy always when making such decisions and when driving transformation with a business. So you may have, again, when you're dealing with your core leadership team that you work on the transformation with, you have to consider not just, okay, this is that person's CV and this is their remits within the business. This is what they have to deliver day to day. This is my checkbox for them. We come back to this checkbox and spreadsheet way of thinking. But you have to also understand what drives them. What are their hurdles that they maybe struggle with? What support can you give them? What are they struggling with? And maybe what can I take off their shoulders so they can focus more on the things where they perform well? And you may have people who do terribly with administration, data entry, and similar things, but they are fantastic with people. And that can be internal in managing teams, that can be with customers, that can be with suppliers, that can be with anything. This is similarly by saying, like, if you measure all animals by their ability to climb a tree, then you will say that monkeys are inherently better than fish. Yeah. But they are adapted to different things. In the same way, that applies to people. Like, there are people who are better suited to interpersonal tasks. There are people who are better suited to administrative tasks. There are people better suited to analytical tasks and any other type of work that you can think about. And so when you're not willing to engage on an empathetic level with people, I don't think you will ever have the genuine ability to understand who they are as a person and then translate that into how are they best positioned within a business so that they can actually perform to their maximum level of ability. But
which
I think
benefits both the business and the person, right?
100%. So I think you come into this position where you might, in the course of a transformation, you will meet people who've been with the business for over 10 years and they're positively miserable in the job that they're doing. And you're like, how have you been here this long if you're not happy? Like, well, why haven't you left? And some people, I mean, the US, I think they're slightly better at this, but employees in Europe, they will chain themselves to a business even to their own detriment sometimes. But mostly you'll say, like, if someone sticks around for more than 5 years, then there must be some sort of motivation, like why they've been here. And sometimes what you find is that over the years, they've been promoted through different levels of responsibility. And they've simply gotten promoted to the point where the only thing left in their job is not the thing that they enjoy doing, but just the frustration. Having worked in consulting, like, this is something I've seen a lot, where you have people who are fantastic data analysts and consultants who can draft up amazing analyses and conclusions and recommendations for action. But they are not people who enjoy managing teams. But if you go to work at any Big Four, then your natural progression is you analyze and then you manage and eventually you sell to customers. And what we do is we take the best analysts and we make them into mediocre managers. And then we take the mediocre managers and we make them into terrible salespeople. By which I'm insulting every Big Four partner listening to this, but it doesn't apply to everyone, right? But it's a natural progression of frustration that you can see in a lot of businesses where if you're good at your job, you're good at the individual contributor role, you are promoted to manager level because the assumption is you know how to do it, you can manage. But management and the individual contribution, they are sometimes two wholly separate skills. Yeah. And so you have to, I think, understand sometimes when a person is frustrated, especially if they've been there a long time, what has happened to you. Yeah. And then come back to this idea, like change has happened to them. Yeah. Right? Maybe they haven't taken too active of a role, like what they've done with them. They've been a loyal soldier, they've stepped up and they've said, you want me to step up into this manager role, I'll do it. Yeah. Sometimes they will step up because they'll say there's no one else to do it. And so I'll do it. But all you're doing then is you're squeezing a tube of toothpaste, which is filled with that person's patience and ability to withstand frustration. And once the tube is empty, there's a couple of outcomes and none of them are good for you. Like either that person is burnt out and no longer able to do their job, that person will leave, or that person will become so disconnected from their job that they basically become a quiet quitter, as it's been such a popular term the last couple of years, right? And so ask yourself, like, how do you inject the motivation back in? Yeah. And sometimes you can take a very senior person, you can say, I'm moving you back to an individual contributor role. And that can be at a senior level. Senior individual contributors, I think, is one of the most underutilized tools in an organization that we have in this entire industry. Yeah. Like, we always think that if someone's senior and if someone, let's be honest, like if someone deserves a high salary, that means they have to manage a lot of people. That means they have to have department heads under them, a lot of staff. Like, no, I can have someone who's exceedingly competent, you know, especially if they're in a technical role, if they're in a product relevant role, they can be an absolute savant in certain processes. And as long as they do their job and their contribution is significant enough, I will justify paying them well enough. But sometimes we couple the requirements to have to manage staff and to have to train and coach and mentor people, which, let's be honest, not everyone enjoys that. You and I, like in our jobs, and we'll probably too, like we are wired in a way that we assume leading people and coaching people, that's something we love, right? Because we like engaging with people. Otherwise, we wouldn't do this job. And the people in charge of making decisions, they are also naturally wired to do that. Otherwise, they wouldn't be at a CEO level, at a partner level where they do those things day to day. But it gets us into a bit of a bubble where it's easy for us to think, I will move someone up and he will be able to manage people and he will be excited because that's the great thing. Like, no, there are people for whom there's nothing worse than getting up in the morning and thinking, today I have to have 5 one-to-ones with people. And telling them how to do their job.
I've got to fill up my energy, my social battery in order. And I know by the end of the day, it'll be, completely depleted with all of these one-to-ones. So I've heard anecdotally that single contributor roles are deemed to be a bit, in a bit of a negative light. Would you agree with that? Do you think a senior single contributor, and just to clarify that, what I mean by that is that if you move somebody from being a people manager leading teams into a senior single contributor role, do you think there's a stigma attached to that?
I think so. I think it's because, like with many other things, there's a stereotype that's established itself, which is seniority should be equal to leadership. And leadership should then be equal to further progression, so to say, right? So I mean, we've all heard this in some form. Like, if you want to move forwards, you have to take more responsibility. And that's fine. But when we hear responsibility within a business, what do we think? Like, we think about taking care of a bigger bucket of things. That means taking care of people, taking care of staff, taking care of teams. Sometimes it can also be taking care of supplier relationships, taking care of outsourced teams, etc. But whether you deal with internal or external people, it's like you said, it's all social energy. And some people have a giant gas tank when it comes to social energy, and they are naturally suited to these things. Other people have no social gas tank, and they have to draw on all their other energies, and those deplete much, much faster because they're not engineered, those energies, to be able to be used for these social purposes. So in a way, if you want to talk in a utopian way as to how this industry should reform itself, but then you're talking really about organizational design across any business, you should almost think about eliminating the term manager, because we have an immediate connotation with a manager is someone who's in charge and someone who has to give, someone who is empowered to give direction and also to essentially decide whether another person is doing well or whether they should be rewarded or punished or something else. Instead, you should almost think about rather coordinators. Like people who coordinate between teams, facilitate communication and leaving individual contributors to do their jobs and deliver.
Yeah.
Now, the manager, you can't eliminate the role completely, because especially for junior staff, you need guidance, you need leadership. But
that could be in the form of mentorship, right? It doesn't have to be managers, right?
It can be. I would say, if you, again, come back to something everybody's had an intersection with, but if you talk about technical support, right? If you get a junior first level support in, like, they will need a lot of support. And it's good that someone like that will have a direct manager, because that manager is not only there to reprimand them, that manager is there to coach them day to day, to give them a daily list of tasks, and that management by spreadsheet, like, do these things, work down your work down your spreadsheet, work down your tick list, that works. But when we get to a certain seniority with people, and it's not even a lot of seniority, I think it can be people with 5 years experience, as little as, you come to a point where you have to ask yourself, like, do I need to micromanage this person daily? And do they need a manager? Yeah. Or do they need a coordinator?
Coordinator, facilitator.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But we don't talk about coordinators. We talk about managers. And even when you talk about senior individual contributors, you think, okay, what's their reporting line? And their reporting line is immediately then associated again with seniority and having to be accountable to someone else, essentially. I mean, we're all ultimately accountable to someone, but reframing that more in, I'm not trying to steer you minute to minute, but rather do your thing. Yeah. And then let's find a way to efficiently coordinate that doesn't use up your energy or your time. Yeah. And again, come back to this typical topic of, look at your sales department and think about how much time they're spending with data entry every day. Yeah. Is that the right way to use that energy? And the same thing you can think about, okay, you will have people for whom that social interaction day to day is just a drain. Are there ways to set that up differently? But it's an uncommon way. I agree with you. There's a stigma attached to it because we look at it in the wrong way.
Yeah, I like that. I think let's normalize the senior single contributor role. I do think there's a lot of value in it. And I do think that focusing people in the right way, I completely agree with you. I think some people are not meant to be senior leaders, but that doesn't mean that then they're not extremely valuable to the business in the sense of the kind of SME knowledge that they have and that they are able to influence in their own ways. I agree with you.
So thinking about the listeners, they want to get into private equity broadly. So we speak to so many people, and it's their primary question: how do I access that marketplace? I guess twofold question: how did you? And what advice would you give someone who is looking to enter private equity?
Yeah, it's a good question. So my career is always an interesting one. People ask me about it, because me giving career advice calibrated on what I've done is the most useless thing I can do for people, because it's extremely hard to replicate. So essentially, my background in very short is when I came off university, I was a management consultant for about 18 months. I worked in consulting for about 2 weeks until I realized it's a job I hated. And not because of the skills, because I love consulting, but specifically at the time I was doing procurement consulting. And procurement consulting is maybe one of the most beneficial things that a business can do, because it's cost cutting, it's direct benefit to your bottom line, but just it wasn't for me. Like doing long spreadsheets and tender requests and whatever else. But I learned a lot of good hard skills like Excel and PowerPoints, and those things are extremely, extremely valuable. I always say, like, one of the skills you should build early on in your career is just number crunching and analysis. Like if you can be good with Excel, people will look at you like you're a wizard, like in a normal business. And it's basic, right? But it's to the average worker, you can make a hell of a difference just by being handy with a spreadsheet. And I did that job for about 18 months. Full disclosure, and I think I can say it now, 13 years later, I was job hunting from week 2. So I looked for my next job for almost a year and a half. And I was applying to private equity right away, because that's something that I briefly got in touch with during my university time, doing my master's degree. And it's just something I always had in mind. My girlfriend, now wife at the time, was working in PE. She was the only person out of our whole class of 250 people who got straight into private equity. So that's just, congratulations to her. She's listening, I'm sure. So there was always this little bit of, I always looked towards her, and she was in this highly prestigious job, and it just always motivated me to get into it myself. And I think in that 15 months, I think I spent at that first consulting business, in that 15 months, I must have written in excess of 300, 400 applications to PE businesses, unpaid internships, everything. I did get offered one job after about 6 months, but it was for a firm whose name escapes me now, but they literally wanted me to work for free for 9 months. which I think was illegal. And I think I told them that on the phone. But that was the situation back then, which was now when was this, 2012, 2013?
Yeah.
And the market was just saturated, right? It was right after the investment banking layoffs, and the industry was just starting to recover from the crisis. So after about 15 months of searching, I got hired into a family office, which is just a family-owned private equity fund. And it was great because
that's a family, high net worth family.
Correct. So
who you manage their
ultra high net worth
family. We call them big distinctions. So the ultra high net worths have B's behind their money, not M's. So I got found by an ultra high net worth family that came across my CV. I remember I had applied for something completely different, which I think was a business analyst at a luxury brand somewhere. And the headhunter just went, I have someone and they're looking for an analyst and it's private equity. And I was like, great. What do they like about my profile? Is it my analysis or is it my degrees, whatever else? It's like, no, they need someone who speaks German and that's all they care about. And I was like, great. Like
I'll take it.
And then I spent about a year at that business, and we were a small team. We were a managing director and 2 analysts. It was very interesting because we had a portfolio of assets, highly real estate focused, but a bunch of other things too. So I had an operating business in Switzerland, a couple of hotels, and I was just sitting at board meetings, like 2 years into my career, which was great. So I was sitting at these board meetings, taking notes, building basic models, making a lot of mistakes left and right, but just it was interesting because it was a small team, and therefore there was no way but to get exposure to all the different relevant things, be they transactions or the operational problems with the businesses. When as a team of 3, you have to get to doing things.
Yeah.
Exactly. And then what happened was, after about a year, my colleague resigned, so the other analyst, and he wasn't happy in the job for a while, and he's now, I think I just saw his profile a couple of weeks ago, like he's a big managing partner now at another fund, so he's done well for himself. But then I remember walking out the door kind of a couple of days before Christmas Eve with my boss, the partner, and I said, well, it's a shame that the other guy's leaving because now it's just you and me. Like, I hope you don't decide to resign. And he gave me this long, quiet look.
Cut to.
And then basically told me that a week before he'd agreed that he would leave the business as well.
Oh.
And so what happened to me in Q1 of the next year, I became essentially the chief exec of a UK family office.
Wow.
And at the time, I was 24 years old.
Oh, gosh.
So, and all of a sudden I had this $1 billion+ balance sheet like under my purview. And so what happened, right? All these board meetings where I was the note taker, all of a sudden I was member of the board. All of a sudden
decision maker.
All of a sudden I was chairperson in certain places, etc. All of a sudden I had conversations with lawyers about liabilities and this and that and here and there. And so I was thrust into change. Like I didn't decide to effect this change, as we said previously. Like that change happened to me. But then I had 2 choices, like, do I leave and do I take an analyst role somewhere else, or do I just lean into it? And a very smart friend of mine who ran a hedge fund, still runs a hedge fund today, basically told me, like, what's the worst that's going to happen if you give it a try? And so I stayed at that business for another 15 months roughly, in a senior position. And I essentially was able to collect that CEO level experience by complete happenstance. So I'd love to say that it's something I engineered my way into, but it's just an opportunity that came. And this is why I say to everybody, if you see an opportunity, however small, wherever you're working, just grab it. Just put your hand up. Just say, let me take a swing at that. And you'll be surprised how often your mentor, your manager, whatever, is more than happy to give you a try at something, and it'll pay off.
During that period, you must have felt at times that you are doing a bad job, or you were failing, or did you feel
every day?
Every day?
Yeah, every minute of it. No, not every minute of every day, but every day at least once. Like every day, I think if you're conscious of what you're working on, and this is with any time you work on something big and intimidating and new to you, you will always think, like, am I tackling this in the right way?
Yeah.
And especially if you have a jump in responsibility, which can happen at any point in your career, right? Like you get hired to do job X, and all of a sudden there's a gap in job Y, and you're like, Belma, can you cover this for a couple of weeks? I'm sure you hear that often enough, right? Like we do that.
The answer is always yes. Yes, I can.
Yeah. No, we always say yes, right? But,
yeah, that's right.
And the truth is, right? Like if you are not afraid of problem solving, then you'll figure it out somehow. But I think any professional worth their salt in this business will constantly doubt themselves if they're doing it 100% the right way. That doesn't mean that we then don't do it anyway. But one of the things I had to learn in that early role of responsibility was basically to say, okay, here's a problem on the table. I've never seen this before. but there's no one else who's going to deal with this. So I will have to figure this out. And I have people I can call. So I had legal support, and I had an accountant, and I had the management teams of relevant businesses we were working with. I had my bankers, like, just pick up the phone and figure it out. And sometimes you will have a contract in front of you for a dispute resolution. And sometimes I would go and Google and I will say, what is a specific performance? I've never heard that before. Yeah. So Google it. And then you're like, oh, okay, this is actually a huge deal. So like we should consider whether we commit to that or not commit to that. And it's great because I think as long as you play it smart, and of course you also have to respect that if you are in a position of leadership and responsibility, then there is a certain level of personal liability that you can come into. And I think that's where you have to be careful. But beyond that, I would say is if you get the chance to do something senior early on in your career, or you can be deep into your career and you can say, okay, there is a niche opening up. Let's jump into it. Yes, you will be nervous. You will be worried you're doing things wrong. But the secret is that happens to everybody. That happens to the best CEOs in the world. And there's no good leader in the world that is not constantly thinking, is there a better way I could be doing this? Am I making a mistake here? The difference is they make the decision anyway. The ones that are ineffective or the ones that don't manage to step up is the ones that have these concerns and let those concerns paralyze them. And then they go, I'd rather leave this to someone else. The other person is no less scared. Yeah. But they're trying because they know if they don't step up, then no decision will be made. And I live my entire professional life by one mantra, which is that a decision is better than no decision. Yeah.
Feel the fear and do it anyway.
100%.
And I get just the final point in terms of advice for people looking to break in. Are there tactical things that people can do? So I think a big part of this audience will be a senior to executive manager within the technology sector. Yeah. A good 80% of it. So we're probably looking at folks that have had a career already and operating at a senior level. Is there advice that you would give them? I don't know, be it networking, be it just apply, be it think about going into this particular sector and getting some experience, because that's incredibly valuable to us. Are there tactical things that people can do?
It's a tough one because I would love to say,
do this.
Go and network and, brush up your CV and send these applications out. The truth is that the difficulty with this job is that it attracts a deluge of people wanting to do it. Very few people actually knowing well how to do it. And here's the worst part for people listening to this. It's extremely hard to position yourself on the positive side of those attributes towards a potential employer visibly. Okay, that's the challenge. So one thing you have to ask yourself is, let's say you are in technology. Let's say you are a deputy CIO at a very large business somewhere. You have responsibility over budget, over people, etc. If you're looking to work in transformation, the thing that a shareholder, that a potential employer will look for is, how do you manage difficult scenarios? How do you manage change? How do you manage distress? How do you manage problems that appear today that we didn't know about yesterday? And if you work in a standard tech role, say you're in charge of a large piece of infrastructure at a large multinational, like that's a huge amount of responsibility. But that doesn't necessarily scream, I'm able to manage change and I'm able to implement transformation. In a way, the best thing you can do at that point, and this is the advice I give to most people, is when I talk to MBA grads, like a lot of them I speak to. So I do a bit of teaching at Imperial College once a year. Yeah, we do a course once a year at Imperial College in May where we do a lecture and we say how to break into PE basically. And I teach the course together with my wife, who is in fund investing, and I'm in direct PE. So it's quite nice because we can represent the whole spectrum of the industry there. And the advice I give to people is, people coming out of an MBA, they've worked in an industry job somewhere previously, they kind of worked in sales, they kind of worked in middle or back office in a bank, they kind of done anything really. And now they have an MBA and the next thing they want to do is they want to work for a huge private equity firm. The problem is, of course, that that's a huge gap to bridge. And what I normally say is, if you look at your career, if you look at everything you can do in life in a job like a circle, then if you work in a certain segment, let's say you work in financial services, then what you've done is, by going down that career path, you've cut out a segment of that circle that you're now focusing on. So let's say to the left and to the right, it's teacher and doctor, and downside is lawyer or something else. No, you've decided you want to be an analytical financial professional, something like that. That still means that within that segment of the circle, which encompasses all jobs in the world, you can do 100,000 different things, but you focused on something. And now assume that in this segment, in this section of the circle, somewhere there's one point, and that point is PE, and that point is probably at the very edge because it's one of the most coveted jobs, so you have to get there. So what you have to think in this mind map is, where am I today, and how far am I away from this PE professional that I want to be, from all these things that we talked about that you need to do, which is take responsibilities, just troubleshooting, managing people, like judging kind of priorities and so on and so forth. And you can make a list of kind of all the skills that you feel would make you a good transformation professional. And then be really honest with yourself. Like, what am I good at? Like, what am I good at? What do I like doing? What do I need to improve, or what do I need to learn about? And then say, okay, this is where I am today. My job is X distance from where I want to be, the end goal being private equity. And here's the trick, right? Like, yes, you might want to get to PE, but it's very difficult to jump from that job straight to PE.
Yeah.
So ask yourself, what could be the next step that I can take that could then feed into PE? What's the next feeder job that I take? And obviously you don't say that in the job interview when you're applying, but basically you want to think about your career as a skill building journey.
Yes.
And how do I accumulate this arsenal of tools that will ultimately allow me to get somewhere where I want to be with the skills that I've built up? So I've said to people before, if you come out of the middle office in banking, so you've done risk management, you've done compliance, but what you really want to do is you want to work as an investment person in a PE fund. I mean, that's a hotly contested job, right? Because you are competing against tens of thousands of applicants, some of whom who will have much more direct experience than you do. Yes, you've done an MBA now, but every year there's hundreds of thousands of MBAs worldwide from great schools that will be able to do that job just in the same way. So what distinguishes you? And then think, okay, if I am unlikely to get into PE, you can still apply, right? You might get lucky. I got lucky. Got get into my PE job, but
would you say applying 200 times is luck? I'd say it's resilience.
Sometimes inevitable. Yeah, somebody must
say that's tenacity.
Somebody would have employed me by accident, is what you're saying. Yeah, basically.
No, I don't think that's true.
No. But basically, I say, if you want to improve your chances, then think, what's the next skill I can add to my arsenal that will help me? And then I say to a lot of these guys, think about working in a consulting firm and working in a role that interacts with PE. Look at where the clientele is PE, right?
Have exposure to PE,
So I say, for example, a great job is in transaction services, the people who do all the number crunching for the smaller, medium PE houses, putting the models together, doing the analysis. And, you know, it's not directly PE, but you're essentially in the PE industry.
Yeah. And you mean all those people that are the reason why 100% of transformations fail?
Well, the transaction services guy, I would say, are not as much to blame. That's more the pure consulting guys who write up the value creation plans and so on. But seriously saying, it's you look at a big four and you have, just in London, you'll have tens of thousands of people whose job it is just every day building financial models for PEs.
Go there.
And so if you can say, I've done that for 5 years, hello, Mr. P, I'd like to do it for you in-house, and we can save money and be more efficient and so on. Some of the best pre-professionals in London that I've worked with have gotten their wings at the big four firms for a couple of years. Serious, good analysis and modeling skills, and then they moved in-house with a fund, and there they are. But that's a much easier step to make, because there might be at any given time a few hundred private equity analyst jobs available, but there will be thousands of consulting roles that you can take. And so but transaction services is one of them. So then you can think about standard management consulting, right? But look at the consulting firms that you find interesting. So if you're really, unlike me, if you're really into procurement, then look for a procurement focused firm, build those skills, work with the businesses, and make sure that while you're in those roles, that's what we said earlier, put your hand up, go to the front line, interact with the customers, interact with where the magic's happening. And I think we'll just circle back, kind of, how do you get into these roles, right? Like, what can people do to get closer to be able to be considered? The biggest thing I always say is, what I look for in a professional in my team, or if I have to hire an interim team, or if I have to hire a staff for the company, I look for people who have taken responsibility before it was allocated to them. Let's say, again, you're working in a team of 20 people, you're somewhere towards the upper third of seniority there. I want to see examples where a topic has come up and you've just jumped on it. You've dealt with it. And you have said, okay, I will take care of this issue. I will take care of this new project. I will evaluate this new tool, and I will take care of implementing it. Because what did we say earlier was the key job of the chief everything officer, right? It's that any problem that comes up, you have to be willing to jump on it and resolve it. If you can show that in your career, you've put your hand up and something's come up and it wasn't clearly allocated to anybody, but you were like, I'll do it and I'll take care of it. And especially if you were successful at it, but not necessarily if you were successful at it, but just the initiative that you're willing to do that. That's, I would say, the single biggest indicator when I speak to someone that for me says this could be a huge asset to us as a firm, to us as a project that we're trying to transform here. And then again, when you show that on your CV in an interview, tell me about projects, tell me about volumes of how much spend or how many people or whatever you've affected. Tell me how you've worked with people, with companies, with processes, and what have you done? What have you achieved?
What have you personally
And I want to see, and ultimately you have to show things that are outside of the day-to-day. Yeah. Some people work exceedingly hard at day-to-day jobs, but what did we say earlier? Like we come in and we help people during those periods when the day-to-day breaks down, when it's chaos. And so show me a signal that you can work when things stop working.
Yes.
That's like the perfect place to wrap up, really. Because I think a couple of things. I think hopefully we've been able to lift a little bit on P. And I just want to thank you for being really honest, because I think we have come at it from a place, hopefully, of honesty, which is we all know that there are stigmas and perceptions and received wisdoms on a firm coming in to do a transaction. And I think the way that certainly I think firstly explained your role will helpfully demystique, if that's the right word, just provide a bit of translucency to a very opaque job, which I think for a lot of people is misunderstood and not even understood at all in some respects. It is just, you've been at a company for 25 years and now we've got an operating partner who's evaluating us. What's one of those? And that's not good, are probably the first things. I think we had a coffee, and the chief everything officer I love. And I think the understanding of that's the job, it's not to come in and simply let people go. And I think that, thank you for asking that, because that was ultimately the elephant in the room, wasn't it? Are you coming in to release people? I think the nature of PE and how often, so I probably on a month interact with 100 people. I would say 70% of them have an ambition or at some stage of the conversation go, talk to me about PE. How do I break into it? What do you do in it? What good, bad, indifferent? And I think that the practical advice is really useful. And I think that I would call them feeder roles. So go and evaluate where you are now in your career and look at a feeder role to be there.
Yeah, and I can't stress this enough when you're interviewing for the feeder role. Don't say you're my stepping stone to work at KKR. Yeah, they don't like that.
Don't go and say you're the feeder role. I'll be here for 18 months while I send 400 applications.
Yeah.
I think that bit around keep your mouth closed, the crux of the job for the first few months, and that's in your role, but I think in most leadership roles when you're new in, 2, 2, 1, listen, observe, look, think, then perhaps speak. And I get from, certainly I would imagine in that role, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but from a position of quite obvious authority that is going to have influence, the first few things you say are going to be taken verbatim. So make sure you've got those facts in line. And then I find just, sort of listening to both of you in terms of the similarities in that personal journey, both from a understanding your areas of strength, understand the skill sets that you have, and also the role of really powerful individual contributors and letting them go and be great individual contributors. I think that that's a big win. So I just wanted to say thank you, because I think that I'm hoping an area that is, or a sector that is either misunderstood, but I think not understood at all. I think that you've really lifted the lid. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Max. It's obviously really nice to see you again. It's really nice to hear you speak about your own journey. And it's lovely to actually have a conversation and feel understood.
Yeah.
Because I think the PE world and the M&A world, perhaps as a permanent person, when I did it as a permanent person, was a very different experience as it is when you're an interim and you go in and you are kind of helping to scale some of these transformations. One, it's a lot more enjoyable as an interim. I think we both agree on that. But I think it's really lovely to hear you speak so candidly and openly. And it's actually really lovely to hear you think that you also ended up in this world purely by chance, like I do. So yeah, it's lovely to see you again. Thank you so much for all your insights.
I have to say thank you for having me here, because I really, really enjoy these conversations. And I think one of the things that the PE industry, and one of the things we didn't touch on today was, where's the industry going and the future of it? And that's a whole episode by itself at some point probably. But the challenge that we have now is that transformation, and Belma, you know this, right? Is that the industry has only really taken transformation serious as a core component of private equity for a few years now. Like we're still in the early stages of transformation becoming a core part of the tool belt. And I think having these conversations and pulling the curtain back a little bit and not only showing the people affected what private equity transformation means, but I would go even further. I would say showing the shareholders what it means and what's really part of it. When we talk about what is success and how do we measure success, how do you define success, how do you define a plan, that is absolutely critical if we want to grow and become more professional as an industry as a whole, because transformation sometimes is seen as this messy something that no one can really define all that well. But what we really need to do is to just have conversations about it, bring everybody to the table, and help the industry as a whole mature in this very important vertical of it. So that's
a lovely note. Thank you for subscribe to the podcast. This is what we're here to do. Thank you so much, Max.
Thank you both.
Thank you.